I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be back.
In this new era, we're taking a new approach.
It will be uncensorable and uncancelable.
We can't give in to those who say we can't do better.
That is a disgrace.
We can make the West great again.
The status quo is not an option.
Welcome to the Liz Truss Show Extra. West Midlands Chief Constable Craig Guildford has retired after huge pressure because the force was found to be fabricating evidence against Israeli supporters and banning them from a local football match. This was at the behest of Islamists in the area. But the Chief Constable wasn't sacked by the Home Secretary because she simply didn't have the powers to do so under the law. This is the latest in a series of incidents where Britain's police forces have been found to be under ideological influence from trans ideologists, Islamists, environmental protesters, and increasingly are not being seen as delivering fair justice or being on the side of ordinary Britons, so-called two-tier policing. Today I talked to Nick Fletcher. He was the Member of Parliament for Don Valley in South Yorkshire, part of Britain's industrial heartlands. He was elected in 2019 because voters were fed up with the left appeasing these elements and wanted a change. Sadly, Conservatives failed to deliver the change that they wanted. And now, these voters, particularly in the north of England in Britain's industrial heartlands, are increasingly angry with the state of affairs. I talked to Nick about the public reaction to the failures we've seen in policing, the failures to hold the grooming gangs to account, the failures to deal with basic issues like crime and law and order. Well, thanks very much, Nick, for joining me on the Liz Truss Show. We're talking this week about the state of British policing. We've just had a situation where the Chief Constable of the West Midlands has retired. He's been allowed to retire even though there were massive failings. He was found to be fabricating evidence. He was found essentially to be appeasing Islamists in West Yorkshire. What's your thoughts about what has gone wrong in this situation?
Well, I mean, it's disgraceful what's happened there, and what's even more concerning is that the Home Secretary can't actually do anything about it, and this is what we're seeing time and time again. Unfortunately, people look at Parliament and expect people as MPs and Secretaries of State and Ministers to actually be able to do things, and so many times these powers have been taken away and given to bodies pretty much out of their control. So all ministers and Secretaries of State can do is go to Parliament and say what they would like to happen rather than actually change the situation. And then we end up with senior people retiring on fantastic pensions, and the public are just left bewildered by what's actually happened in front of them. And the trust starts to evaporate, starts to disappear, as we've seen time and time again over these past decades.
And the particular case in the West Midlands appears to be that the Chief Constable was in hock to Islamists in the area, failing to deal with crimes that were being committed, fabricating evidence. We also have seen in South Yorkshire, the area that you're used to represent, again, the police have been accused of appealing Islamism, not dealing with the grooming gangs. Is this happening right across British police forces?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's I think people have been scared because of all the minority groups and all the division that are created by these minority groups, have been scared to call these things out. And people that do call them out are obviously subject to huge pile-ons by social media and often lose their jobs, accused of all kinds of different, whether it's transphobia, whether it's just racism, whether it's xenophobia, all the different kinds of minority group words come out there, and so people just stay silent. And what's worse is that the general public have stayed silent an awful lot of the time as well. We seem to have silenced so many people, and it's terrible to see what's actually happening. And people are so frustrated with it, and we're seeing that across the board. We're seeing that with politics. We're seeing the way the Conservative Party have been spoke of. We're seeing that the way it's just happening everywhere. People are so frustrated. But many of them are too afraid to actually call this out, and we're seeing this actually in the institutions that should be there to look after us, such as the police. If we can't trust the police to do their job, then the country's in a very sorry state.
Meanwhile, we're seeing the police arresting comedians at Heathrow Airport for speaking out on X. We're seeing people arrested for praying outside abortion clinics. So we're seeing people who are simply expressing themselves with views that don't really go along with the current orthodoxy. We're seeing those people persecuted.
That's right, we are. You see, many people, we police by consent in this country. That's what we do. But the only way that works is if the public have got respect for the police, and the police have actually got respect for themselves. And I see it too often where the police have actually lost respect for themselves. And it's just, when you see things like this, when they see police, and when they arrest these people, they often go in, so many of them, half a dozen of them, to arrest a comedian, or, it just looks like they're bullies. And especially for people praying outside abortion clinics, which again, it makes them look like bullies, while other offenders seem to get away with it. And as I say, it's continually eroding that consent. And if unfortunately, if the police lose that, they've got nothing to back it up. In America, it's different. They can police by force, they carry guns, all kinds of different ways that they can actually deal with people. But we deal with it differently in this country. But it only works if that respect is there both ways. And I'm afraid it has been eroded. And even if 90% of these people, even if 90% of the police force are doing a good job, and I would imagine at least 90% are, even those small fractions that are not make it make it so difficult for the rest of the police to do their job.
And you're a proud Christian, Nick, and you've spoken out about this issue about people praying outside abortion clinics before. Do you feel that there is two-tier policing, that people who are Muslims are getting very different treatment from people who are Christians? And of course, Britain is a Christian country. We have a established church in this country.
I mean, that's one thing I say all the time, that we are a Christian country, and there's lots of people try to say, no, we're not, we're a secular country, but no, we are a Christian country. And when we see people who are praying outside abortion clinics being arrested, it definitely brings that perception of two-tier policing. And perception is everything. This is what it really boils down to. If people believe that there's two-tier policing, then the police are really going to struggle. And as I say, I mean, there's been lots and lots of different pieces of evidence that have come forward. We just spoke about them. There definitely appears to be two-tier policing. And I think a lot of that two-tier policing comes about not necessarily because that's what the police actually want. It's just that they're in fear of being called a racist or whatever. And I think that's what's happening.
Isn't it extraordinary? Because if you speak to an average member of the public in somewhere like Doncaster or Rotherham, they don't agree with what the police are doing, do they? They want to see fair policing. They want to see the police focused on, crimes like rape not whether or not somebody's being a racist. And how is that manifesting itself? What are people saying now about how the police are behaving?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be careful because I think the more we tear the police down, the harder we make it for them. But I do think the people in power, the people in responsibility, ought to listen to the public and realise how they're beginning to feel with that. I mean, I've still got the ultimate respect for the police. I was brought up with respect for the police, and you know, I mean, when I see a police officer, I mean, there is that respect there. I understand these people are putting their life on the line a lot of the time. They're running into situations where they don't have to. So I do think we have to be careful with it. But it is incumbent on the people in power to listen to what people are concerned about and make sure that the police are doing what they're supposed to do, which is, you know, I mean, make us feel safe, keep us safe, be a deterrent, and be fair. Be fair more than anything else. It doesn't matter what colour somebody is, doesn't matter what their belief is, no matter, you know, I mean, whether they're straight, whether they're gay or anything. We should all be treated equally under the law. And if people don't think that's happening, then they lose that respect. And the same again, as I say, when we lose that respect, then we lose that way of policing with consent. And if that's lost, then does that mean eventually then we end up being policed like they're policed in America? And the last thing I want to see is police with guns on the street. It's just not what I want to see.
There are some parts of Britain where the police won't go, essentially no-go areas. And, you know, we've had many cases where the police have been unarmed and they've faced armed criminals. And I think that is a problem. And you made a very interesting point earlier on, saying that the Home Secretary doesn't actually have the power presently to sack these police chiefs who have done the wrong thing. And I agree with you. I think we've got many great frontline officers in the police, but we've got this middle layer who can't be hired, can't be fired, and sit there like a blob. And they seem to have been captured by this alien ideology. It's an ideology that most people in Britain don't subscribe to, whether it is wokery, you know, transgender ideology, even Islamist ideology. I mean, the chief constable of the West Midlands had actually had the chief executive of the local mosque on his selection panel, which I find extraordinary. So what are we going to do about this unelected blob? And it's not just the police. You can see this across many British institutions that over probably even since the 1960s, there has been a gradual takeover of the institutions, and many of them are now pretty rotten. And you've written a book about this, haven't you, called The Revival?
Yes, I have. And 38 subjects that many people don't want to talk about. So I hope people will go out there and purchase that, because I think, I hope they will learn an awful lot. But going back to the actual hiring and firing, it was something that the coalition government did in 2012. It was to bring in police and crime commissioners, and it's police and crime commissioners that can actually do the hiring and firing now. But I think, and if you ask people, do they want more power locally? Most people will say, yes, we want more power locally. But unfortunately, I think that's what happens, is that maybe they get too friendly with each other, maybe become best friends, maybe they spend time socialising together, rather than actually holding these people to account. And so you end up with little cliques within communities, and then it's the friend that needs firing, and it becomes very difficult to do. I think if we went back to Parliament, then those relationships are not there, and then the person that's actually taking the flak for what actually happens, which is the Home Secretary a lot of the time, actually has the powers to deal with it. So we seem to have given an awful lot of power out to the country, and people think that's a great idea, but I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we're not seeing that. And I think some of that power needs to come back, because when you stand in front of Parliament, people expect that place to actually be able to control what's happening. And time again, when I was sat on those green benches just watching what was happening, you realise how little power was actually left there. And people do look weak when they can't actually control what their job role says. So I think that's what needs to happen. Labour are actually getting rid of the police and crime commissioners, but I still don't think they're giving the Home Secretary the power to sack chief constable. So I don't know what's actually, that might actually even make it worse. So we'll have to see what happens.
I think when you were first elected when the Red Wall fell, because people in places like Don Valley were so frustrated with the Labour Party, when you went to Parliament, were you shocked by how little power MPs actually had?
Yeah, massively shocked. It's and this is why I wrote the book, The Revival. It was to educate people where power lies. There's all the time while I was in Parliament, I had a South Yorkshire mayor and the local mayor and the local council always blaming central government for lack of funds, lack of this, lack of that. It's there. And all the time you actually realise, no, all this power and this money has actually been transferred to you, but you won't use it. And it was so frustrating, so frustrating. It's like any job. The longer you're in it, the better that you get at it. And I think by the time that I left, I was turning into quite a good backbench MP because I'd learnt so much. And I realised, MPs have got a voice and they need to use it. And you cannot be everybody's best friend. It's just like being in business. You cannot be everybody's best friend. You have to call out the wrongs that you see. And as I say, it takes a few years for you to get into that stride. But I think I tried my very hardest, especially with the trans ideology, especially shouting up for men and boys. Those were the two issues that I really jumped on, and I think I did manage to see a lot of movement and a lot of common sense brought forward. So I did enjoy that. But the frustration was why I wrote my book. I think the people do not know where the power lies. A lot of the time they do not know who they're voting for and why they're voting. And I also heard all the frustration on all the different issues. Why can't we do this? Why can't they do that? Why can't they do this? So, as I say, 38 chapters, 38 difficult subjects, and I'd encourage everyone to buy the book, to read it. Yes.
Well, what I discovered is it's not just Parliament that's had its power taken away, it's ministerial office. I mean, you talked about the Home Office, but the same is true pretty much in every government department. And it is because successive governments, particularly the Blair government, legislated to create all these unelected bodies. They gave more power to the judiciary, more power to things like the National College of Policing, which has become the woke College of Policing, inventing non-crime hate incidents. So you had this situation where all the power had been taken away. And I think that's also true for local authorities, actually. And until those laws are changed, people are just going to be incredibly frustrated about how difficult it is to get things done in Britain. And what has happened is the left has successfully used all these unelected vehicles to implement their ideology, to put their people in. So I don't think it's just a case of changing the law. It's also about making sure that there are people in position who actually reflect the views of the general public, and that we have gone so far away from that in terms of policing, where so many people seem to see, or so many people in the criminal justice system treat the criminals as victims, and the victims are something to ignore, and we can't go on with that. And I think the grooming gangs is probably the most egregious case of that. And we saw that police in South Yorkshire were actually involved, and local councillors were actually involved.
They ignored what was plain to see in front of them, and that happened in all different kinds of institutions. I mean, we had young girls turning up to A&E who could have only have suffered the injuries they suffered through acts of sexual violence, and yet they knew they were underage because of their records that was there, and there was nothing said. Literally nothing said. And this has been happening through the police, through counsellors, through all different kinds of things. And it's just gone. I mean, and that is just, I mean, it's beyond criminal. It's just, you cannot understand why this has happened. And these poor young girls, 12, 13, 14 years old, put through that and then not believed, and their blind eye turned. It's just absolutely unbelievable that this has happened, and it has to stop. I mean, it has to stop, and it will. But we've all got to play our part, and it's not just the police. It's not just the institutions. I believe it's us as individuals. It's what I write all the way through my book. There's personal responsibilities that we have. Free speech is a huge. It's a huge part of what makes any country great, but it needs treating with responsibility. But when you need to call something out, we have to be brave enough to call that out. And that takes an awful lot of doing, especially if you're not part of a police force, if you're not part of, just by being general public. I think we've all got a duty to call out when we see these wrongdoings. And it's difficult, but if we don't, this is where we end up. How many young girls could have been saved from going through that horrendous period of time in their life if somebody had have actually called them out, listened? I'm sure we could have stopped. We could have stopped so much of it. And I'm sure, in all fairness, I'm sure this is still happening now. And it will not have just happened in Rotherham. A colleague of mine said, I'm sure these rape gangs didn't have boundaries. I mean, maybe it was more prolific in different areas, but I'm sure it's happened in Doncaster. I'm sure it's happened across the entire country. And as I say, if people can get away with things, then this is what will happen. And so we've all got to stand up. We've all got to stand up. We've all got to call these things out. And until we do that, then I'm afraid, well, it's always going to be somebody else's fault. And we're never actually going to have a country that we want to live in, or a country that we're proud of.
Well, I completely agree. We all have to fight, and we have to fight for massive change in this country because it is seriously wrong. Our institutions are broken. They're not working. Thank you, Nick, so much for joining me on the Liz Truss Show, and continue the fight. Thank you.
Thank you.
That discussion with Nick shows how bad it is. People from business, from all walks of life, getting elected to Parliament and finding that there simply isn't anything there, that the powers that Parliament used to hold have been given away. Seeing that the Home Secretary can't actually sack a police chief who has been responsible for fabricating evidence in his own police force. A restoration of leadership is required. A restoration of accountability is required. And Parliament, as per the British Constitution, needs to be sovereign and ultimately driving those decisions. Nick is now part of a growing movement. He's written a book called The Revival about how we transform Britain to once again being a sovereign parliamentary democracy.